My own son told me I repeat myself, so I repeated the transfer to someone else. The silence that follows betrayal is different from any other kind of quiet. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel that this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe, because this story might help someone draw closer to God's love. Amen. My name is Margaret Russo, and I am 78 years old. I live alone in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street in Clifton, New Jersey. A home that my late husband Dominic and I purchased 41 years ago with every penny of our combined savings. The mortgage papers still bear both our signatures, faded now but legible, tucked safely in the wooden filing cabinet beside my kitchen table, where I pay bills every month with the same careful precision I've maintained for 4 decades. This morning, like every morning for the past 10 years since Dominic's passing, I wake before sunrise. The house settles around me with familiar creaks and sighs. The sound of old wood adjusting to another day's temperature changes. I slip my feet into the worn terry cloth slippers Dominic bought me for Christmas in 2010, the last Christmas we shared, and pad softly to the kitchen where I begin my daily conversation with the Lord. The rosary beads click gently between my arthritic fingers as I recite the prayers my mother taught me 70 years ago in this very neighborhood when Italian immigrants like my family filled these streets with the sounds of foreign languages and familiar faith. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The words flow automatically. Muscle memory of the soul, while I wait for the ancient coffee percolator to finish its bubbling ritual on the stove. From my kitchen window, I can see the bell tower of St. Anthony's Catholic Church 3 blocks away, its cross catching the first rays of morning sunlight like a beacon calling the faithful to begin another day in service to our Savior. That cross has been my compass for more years than I care to count, a visual reminder that even in the deepest loneliness, I am never truly alone. Jesus understands suffering. He knows what it means to be abandoned by those you love most. The house feels enormous around me now, filled with 41 years of memories that echo in rooms where laughter once rang freely, and family dinners brought together 3 generations around the dining room table. Dominic built himself from oak he selected personally at the lumber yard. Every piece of furniture tells a story. The rocking chair where I nursed my son Michael through countless childhood illnesses, the piano bench where he practiced scales with reluctant fingers, the kitchen counter where we shared coffee and dreams about grandchildren who would fill these rooms with joy again someday. But someday never came the way we imagined it would. Dominic died of a massive heart attack in his sleep 10 years ago this October, found peaceful in our bed with his rosary still wrapped around his fingers, his face serene as if he'd simply closed his eyes to pray, and awakened in the presence of our Lord instead. The autopsy said his heart simply stopped. No pain, no struggle, just a quiet transition from this world to the next that I've come to see as God's final mercy to a man who'd worked construction for 45 years, building other people's dreams while his own body slowly wore down under the weight of honest labor. Since then, my world has contracted to the boundaries of this house, this street, this small circle of familiar places where my memories feel safe and my faith feels strong. I attend Mass at St. Anthony's every Sunday, sitting in the 3rd pew on the right where Dominic and I sat together for decades, where our names are still whispered in the prayers of neighbors who remember when we were young and full of plans that seemed certain to unfold exactly as we'd imagined them. The other parishioners treat me with the gentle kindness reserved for widows and the elderly, offering rides when it snows and checking that I have groceries when storms are predicted. But their kindness, while genuine, carries the subtle distance that separates those who still have partners from those of us who've learned to set the table for one and sleep alone in beds that feel vast and cold, despite electric blankets and extra pillows. My son Michael calls every few weeks, his voice carrying the dutiful tone of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine affection. He lives 40 minutes away in a McMansion in Summit with his wife Vanessa and their 2 teenage children, my grandchildren whom I see perhaps 3 times a year for stilted holiday visits that feel more like diplomatic missions than family gatherings. Vanessa has never liked me, though she maintains a veneer of politeness that fools no one. She calls me Mrs. Russo, instead of mom, despite 15 years of marriage to my son, and she speaks to me in the slow, loud voice people use with children and the mentally impaired, as if age has somehow damaged my ability to understand normal conversation. Her smiles never reach her eyes, and she has a way of redirecting every conversation away from topics that might require her to acknowledge my humanity or intelligence. Michael himself has grown distant over the years, transformed from the boy who once climbed into my lap to share his troubles into a successful corporate manager who speaks to me primarily about practical matters, my health, my finances, my situation, as he calls it. He never asks about my feelings, my dreams, my memories of his father, or whether I'm lonely in this big house where his childhood laughter still echoes in empty rooms. But this Tuesday morning feels different somehow, charged with intention I can't identify or dismiss. As I sit at my kitchen table with my coffee and my morning prayers, my phone rings with the aggressive electronic chirping that always makes me jump slightly. The caller ID shows Michael's name, unusual for a weekday morning when he's typically consumed with meetings and deadlines that define his professional life. "Good morning, sweetheart," I answer, genuinely pleased to hear from him unexpectedly. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounds strained, formal, as if he's reading from a script he's rehearsed. "Listen, Vanessa and I need to come talk to you about something important. Are you free this afternoon around 2? Something in his tone makes my stomach tighten with the same instinctive dread I felt the night the hospital called about Dominic. "Of course, honey. Is everything all right? Are the children okay?" "Everyone's fine, Mom. We just need to discuss some things. About your future." The word future hangs between us like a threat, loaded with implications I don't want to examine too closely. At 78, my future feels more like a conclusion than a beginning, more about preparation for eternity than planning for earthly endeavors. But Michael's voice carries a weight that suggests he has very specific ideas about what my future should look like, ideas that may not align with my own hopes and preferences. "I'll put on fresh coffee," I tell him, defaulting to the hospitality that has defined my role as wife and mother for more than half a century. "Don't go to any trouble," he replies quickly. "This won't take long." After we hang up, I sit at my kitchen table staring at the phone, trying to shake the feeling that something fundamental is about to change in ways I'm not prepared to handle. I pick up my rosary again, running the familiar beads through my fingers while I whisper prayers for wisdom, for strength, for the grace to accept whatever God has planned for this chapter of my life. But deep in my heart, in the place where a mother's intuition lives, I sense that the conversation coming this afternoon will test my faith in ways I haven't experienced since the night Dominic died, and left me alone in a world that suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming. The hours until 2 o'clock stretch like an eternity of worried anticipation. 2 o'clock arrives with the punctuality of Judgment Day. Through my living room window, I watch Michael's black BMW pull into my driveway, with the mechanical precision of someone who views this visit as another business appointment to be efficiently completed. Vanessa emerges from the passenger seat wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably costs more than my monthly Social Security check, her blonde hair pulled back in the severe style she favors for what she calls serious conversations. Michael follows, adjusting his tie with the nervous gesture I remember from his childhood when he was about to confess some misdeed that required parental intervention. But he's 45 years old now, a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company, driving a car that costs more than Dominic and I ever made in a single year. Success has changed him in ways that go beyond material prosperity. It's hardened something essential in his character, made him impatient with anything that doesn't contribute directly to his upward mobility. I open the door before they can ring the bell, greeting them with the same warm smile I've offered every visitor to this house for 4 decades. "Come in, sweetheart. Vanessa, you look lovely as always." Vanessa's response is the brittle smile she reserves for social obligations she'd rather avoid. "Hello, Mrs. Russo. Thank you for making time for us today." Making time, as if my calendar is filled with pressing engagements that compete for my attention, as if I haven't been sitting alone in this house for weeks, hoping for exactly this kind of unexpected visit from my only child. They settle themselves on my living room sofa, The burgundy velvet one Dominic and I saved for 2 years to purchase, back when furniture was built to last generations rather than seasons. Michael sits forward with his elbows on his knees, adopting the posture he uses when delivering quarterly reports to corporate executives. Vanessa perches beside him with her purse clutched in her lap like a shield against contamination from my middle-class environment. The coffee I prepared sits untouched on the table between us, growing cold while they exchange glances that suggest a conversation already concluded in private before arriving at my door. This is theater, I realize with growing unease. They've already decided whatever they came here to decide. My role is simply to listen and comply. "Mom," Michael begins, his voice carrying the careful modulation of someone who's rehearsed this speech multiple times. "Vanessa and I have been talking about your situation here. We're concerned about your safety, living alone in this big house. Your situation." The phrase lands like a small slap, reducing my life to a problem that requires their management and solution. I've lived in this house longer than Michael has been alive, raised him in these rooms, nursed Dominic through his final illness here, maintained every system and structure with the competence of someone who understands that homes require constant attention and care. "I'm managing fine, honey," I reply gently, though something in his tone makes my heart begin to race with the irregular rhythm that sometimes wakes me in the middle of the night. "Dr. Patterson says my health is excellent for my age." Vanessa leans forward slightly, her expression shifting into the patronizing concern she probably uses with subordinates at her marketing firm. "But Margaret, what happens if you fall on these stairs? What if you have an emergency and no one's here to help you?" The scenarios she outlines are possibilities I've considered many times during long, sleepless nights, when every creak and groan of the house settling seems magnified by solitude and worry. But I've also lived through 41 years of emergencies in this house: burst pipes, power outages, Michael's broken arm when he was 12, Dominic's first heart attack 5 years before the final one. I've handled crises with the competence that comes from necessity, and the faith that God provides strength when circumstances demand more than we think we can bear. "I have Mrs. Chen next door," I remind them, gesturing toward the window that faces my neighbor's kitchen. "She checks on me every day, and Father Morrison visits twice a week. I'm not as isolated as you seem to think." Michael and Vanessa exchange another look, and I catch something passing between them that makes my stomach tighten with apprehension. This isn't casual concern from loving family members. This feels calculated, purposeful, driven by motivations they haven't yet revealed. "The thing is, Mom," Michael continues, his voice taking on the patient tone people use when explaining simple concepts to slow learners. "This house is becoming a burden. The property taxes keep going up. The heating bills are astronomical. The roof needs work, and the foundation has some settling issues we noticed last time we were here." I want to interrupt, to point out that I've managed these expenses successfully for 10 years since Dominic's death, that my teacher's pension and Social Security provide adequate income for my modest needs, that I've maintained this house with the same careful attention I brought to 38 years of educating other people's children. But something in Michael's expression warns me that interrupting would be unwelcome, that my perspective on my own life is somehow irrelevant to this conversation. "We found a wonderful place for you," Vanessa says, pulling a glossy brochure from her purse with the efficiency of a salesperson closing a deal. "Sunset Manor is a beautiful assisted living community in Springfield. They have activities, meal service, housekeeping, medical staff on site 24 hours a day." She spreads the brochure across my coffee table like she's presenting evidence in a court case. The photographs show smiling elderly people playing cards, attending craft sessions, participating in what the marketing materials describe as enriching social activities designed to promote wellness and community engagement. These people in the pictures look nothing like me. They seem resigned to a kind of institutional happiness, content to have their days structured by someone else's schedule, grateful for entertainment that requires no intellectual engagement or spiritual depth. I taught Shakespeare and Dickens to high school students for nearly 4 decades. I've read Dante's Divine Comedy in the original Italian. I maintain correspondence with former students who still seek my advice about literature and life decisions. "How much does this place cost?" I ask, though I suspect I already know the answer will be far beyond my means. Michael shifts uncomfortably. The first crack in his composed presentation. It's expensive, Mom. About $4,000 a month. But here's the thing. If we sell this house, the proceeds would more than cover your care for years. Decades, probably. Sell this house. The words hang in the air like a death sentence, transforming everything I thought I understood about this conversation into something far more sinister and devastating. They're not here because they're concerned about my welfare. They're here because they want my house. This is my home, I say quietly, my voice barely audible above the sound of my heart pounding against my ribs. Your father and I bought this house with our wedding money. We painted every room ourselves. He built the back deck with his own hands. Our memories are in these walls. Vanessa's expression doesn't change, but I catch a flicker of impatience in her eyes. But Margaret, memories don't require a specific location. You'll make new memories at Sunset Manor, and honestly, maintaining this place is just going to become more difficult as you get older. As you get older, another phrase that reduces my entire existence to a medical condition requiring management by people who supposedly know better than I do what's best for my life. I'm 78 years old, not 98. I read without glasses, drive my own car, balance my own checkbook, and cook meals that would shame most women half my age. I'm not ready for assisted living, I tell them firmly, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't know I still possessed. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. Michael's facade of patient concern finally cracks, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. Mom, you're not being realistic. You repeat the same stories over and over. You forget things. Last time we were here, you asked me 3 times if I wanted more coffee. You repeat yourself. The accusation hits me like a physical blow, striking at the deepest fear of every aging person, that our minds are failing, that our thoughts and memories have become burdens to the people we love most. But I remember that visit clearly. I offered him coffee multiple times because he seemed nervous and distracted, because I was trying to be a good hostess, because silence made the conversation uncomfortable for all of us. I don't repeat myself, I say, though doubt creeps into my voice like poison seeping through cracks in my foundation. Do I repeat myself? Have I become one of those elderly people who tell the same stories because they've forgotten they've already shared them? Is my mind failing in ways I can't recognize or acknowledge? Vanessa leans forward with what she probably thinks is compassionate understanding. Margaret, it's natural for memory to become less reliable as we age. There's no shame in needing help. But we can't let pride put you in danger. Pride. Another accusation disguised as concern. They're not just questioning my competence. They're suggesting that my resistance to their plan comes from vanity, rather than legitimate preference for maintaining control over my own life. They're reframing my desire to remain in my own home as a character flaw that needs to be corrected, rather than a reasonable choice that deserves respect. That night, after they leave with promises to look into the details and explore our options, I sit alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea that grows cold while I stare at the brochure they left behind. The faces in the photographs seem to mock me with their artificial contentment, their surrender to lives managed by strangers who profit from their helplessness. I pick up my rosary and begin to pray, but for the first time in years, the familiar words bring no comfort. Hail Mary, full of grace. But grace feels absent from this situation. I feel abandoned by grace, betrayed by the son I raised to honor his parents, manipulated by a daughter-in-law who sees me as an obstacle to her financial security. Lord, I whisper into the darkness of my kitchen, they want to take my home, the home Dominic and I built together. They want to put me away like furniture they no longer need. The silence that follows feels different from the companionable quiet I've grown accustomed to in the years since Dominic's death. This silence feels empty, void of the divine presence that usually sustains me through difficult moments. For the first time since my husband's funeral, I wonder if God is listening to my prayers, or if I've become as invisible to him as I apparently am to my own family. Am I being tested, or just forgotten? 3 weeks pass before Michael calls again. 3 weeks during which I replay our conversation countless times, searching for signs I might have missed, words I might have misunderstood. Each morning, I wake with the same gnawing anxiety that something terrible is approaching, like a storm gathering strength beyond the horizon, visible only to those who know how to read the warning signs in shifting winds and darkening clouds. During those lonely weeks, I find myself second-guessing every word I speak, every story I tell Mrs. Chen when she stops by with homemade soup, every conversation I have with Father Morrison during his pastoral visits. Do I repeat myself? Have I told him about Dominic's heart attack before? Did I already mention that the roses need pruning? The doubt Michael planted grows like a cancer, metastasizing through my confidence until I begin to question not just my memory, but my right to trust my own perceptions of reality. The call comes on a Thursday morning while I'm watering the African violets on my kitchen windowsill. The same violets I've tended for 15 years, descendants of plants my mother brought from Italy when she was barely older than a child herself. Michael's voice sounds different this time, businesslike and distant, as if he's reading from a script prepared by someone else. "Mom, I've arranged for someone to come see you tomorrow morning. Dr. Wesley Porter. He's a specialist in geriatric medicine." My hands freeze on the watering can, sending a small stream of water across the windowsill and onto the floor. "A doctor?" "Michael, I just saw Dr. Patterson 3 months ago for my physical. Everything was fine." "This is different, Mom. Dr. Porter specializes in cognitive assessment. Given some of the things we've noticed during our visits, Vanessa and I think it would be wise to have you evaluated." Cognitive assessment. The phrase hits me like a physical blow, confirming fears I've been trying to suppress since that afternoon when they sat in my living room discussing my situation as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. They're questioning my mental competence, building a case for their argument that I'm no longer capable of living independently. "What things have you noticed?" I ask, though I'm terrified to hear the answer. Michael's sigh carries the exaggerated patience of someone forced to explain obvious facts to a slow learner. "The repetitive conversations, Mom, the way you ask the same questions multiple times. Last week when I called, you seemed confused about what day it was." I want to defend myself, to point out that I was recovering from a bout of flu that week, that anyone might be disoriented when awakened from a fever-induced nap by an unexpected phone call. But something in Michael's tone warns me that my explanations will be dismissed as further evidence of cognitive decline, proof that I lack the insight to recognize my own limitations. "I don't need a cognitive assessment," I say firmly, drawing on reserves of dignity I didn't know I still possessed. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Mom, this isn't optional. The appointment is tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Dr. Porter will come to the house so you don't have to worry about transportation. Not optional." The words land like prison bars slamming shut, trapping me in a situation I never consented to and cannot escape. My own son is forcing me to submit to medical evaluation by a stranger who will determine whether I'm competent to continue living in my own home, making my own decisions, controlling my own destiny. After we hang up, I sit at my kitchen table with shaking hands, staring at the phone as if it might ring again with news that this conversation was some kind of cruel joke, a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with simple explanation. But the silence stretches endlessly, filled only with the ticking of the mantel clock Dominic and I received as a wedding gift 53 years ago. I try to pray, but the familiar words feel hollow and mechanical, empty of the comfort they've provided throughout decades of smaller crises and manageable sorrows. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." But heaven feels impossibly distant, and God's name feels foreign on my tongue, as if I'm speaking a language I once knew fluently, but have somehow forgotten through disuse. That night, sleep eludes me completely. I lie in the bed I shared with Dominic for 41 years, staring at the ceiling while my mind races through decades of memories, searching for evidence that my cognitive abilities remain intact. I can recite the Pledge of Allegiance, the Apostles' Creed, and entire passages from the poetry I taught to generations of high school students. I remember the names of every child in my first-grade class at St. Joseph's Elementary School in 1955. I can tell you the exact date of every family birthday, anniversary, and significant milestone from the past 70 years. But doubt is a poison that contaminates everything it touches, and by morning, I find myself questioning whether these memories are accurate or simply elaborate fabrications created by a mind that's losing its grip on reality. Maybe Michael is right. Maybe I do repeat myself. Maybe the stories I think I'm telling for the first time are actually worn narratives I've shared dozens of times without realizing it. Dr. Wesley Porter arrives precisely at 10 o'clock, driving a silver Mercedes that looks more expensive than any vehicle that's ever been parked in my driveway. He's younger than I expected, perhaps 50, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggests he spends considerable money on his wardrobe and grooming. His handshake is firm but brief, professional rather than warm, and he carries a leather briefcase that he sets on my dining room table with the authority of someone accustomed to conducting business in other people's homes. "Mrs. Russo, I'm Dr. Porter. Your son asked me to conduct a comprehensive cognitive evaluation to assess your current mental status and determine whether you're experiencing any age-related cognitive decline." His language is precise and clinical, reducing my entire existence to a series of test scores and diagnostic categories. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling, whether I'm comfortable with this process, or if I have any questions about what the evaluation will entail. I'm simply a subject to be assessed, a problem to be diagnosed and categorized according to criteria I've played no role in establishing. The tests begin immediately. He asks me to remember lists of words, draw geometric shapes, answer questions about current events and historical facts. Some tasks are laughably simple: spelling my name, identifying the current president, explaining the difference between a cat and a dog. Others require concentration and effort that feel deliberately designed to confuse and frustrate elderly minds. "Who is the current governor of New Jersey?" he asks, consulting a clipboard filled with questions. "Phil Murphy," I answer confidently. "What year did World War II end?" 1945. "Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens?" This question stops me cold. Not because I can't perform the calculation, but because I recognize it as a trap, a test designed to identify cognitive impairment rather than assess functional intelligence. Who counts backwards by sevens in real life? What practical purpose does this skill serve beyond creating opportunities for medical professionals to label elderly people as mentally deficient? I complete the task correctly, but Dr. Porter makes notes on his clipboard that I cannot see, observations that will somehow determine whether I'm competent to continue living in my own home. The entire process feels like an elaborate performance designed to reach a predetermined conclusion, a medical charade that legitimizes decisions already made by other people for other reasons. "Mrs. Russo," Dr. Porter says as he packs his briefcase, "I'll be submitting my report to your son within the next few days. Based on what I've observed today, I do see some areas of concern that warrant further discussion about your living situation and care needs." Areas of concern. The phrase hangs in the air like a death sentence, vague enough to encompass any behavior or response that doesn't meet his arbitrary standards for elderly competence. I want to ask what specific concerns he's identified, what exactly I've done wrong during this evaluation, but something in his demeanor warns me that my questions would be unwelcome and possibly counterproductive. After he leaves, I sit alone in my living room, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of a life well lived, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The house suddenly feels different, contaminated by the presence of someone who came here not to help me, but to gather evidence for my son's campaign to remove me from the only place I've ever felt truly safe and loved. That evening, the phone rings again. This time it's Michael, his voice carrying a mixture of false sympathy and barely concealed satisfaction. "Mom, I just spoke with Dr. Porter. He's concerned about some cognitive issues he identified during your evaluation. Memory problems, difficulty with complex tasks, some confusion about dates and time frames." "I wasn't confused about anything," I protest, but my voice sounds weak and uncertain even to my own ears. I answered all his questions correctly. Dr. Porter is a specialist, Mom. He knows what to look for. The important thing is that we address these issues before they become more serious. Before they become more serious. The implication is clear. My mental decline is inevitable, progressive, a medical certainty that requires immediate intervention by people better qualified than I am to make decisions about my own life. My son has transformed me from a competent adult into a patient requiring management, a burden that must be dealt with efficiently and decisively. What does this mean? I ask, though I already know the answer will devastate whatever remains of my independence and dignity. It means we need to move forward with the assisted living plan, Mom. Dr. Porter agrees that living alone is no longer safe for you. I've already spoken with Sunset Manor and they have an opening next month. Next month? 4 weeks to say goodbye to 41 years of memories, to pack up a lifetime of possessions, to surrender the last vestige of control over my own destiny. 4 weeks to prepare for exile from the only place I've ever called home. I hang up the phone and collapse into Dominic's old recliner, the one piece of furniture that still carries his scent after all these years. The tears come then, not the gentle sadness of grief, but the harsh, bitter sobs of betrayal and abandonment. My own son has conspired against me, used my love and trust as weapons to steal my home and my freedom. Dominic, I whisper into the empty room. They're taking everything we built together. Our son, our own son, is destroying everything we worked for. The silence that follows feels absolute, void of comfort or hope. For the first time since Dominic's funeral, I wonder if love is strong enough to survive the cruelties that people inflict on each other in the name of family duty and practical necessity. Jesus, they've taken my voice. They've taken my home. They've even convinced me that my own mind is failing. But you were betrayed too, weren't you? By people who claim to love you. Maybe you understand this kind of pain. The news of Dr. Porter's evaluation spreads through my small family like wildfire consuming dry kindling. Within hours of Michael's phone call, my granddaughter Emma calls from her college dorm room in Pennsylvania. Her voice trembling with emotion. I haven't heard from her since she was a little girl crying over scraped knees and broken toys. Grandma, Dad told me about the doctor's visit. He says you might have to move to a nursing home. The words tumble out between sniffles. 18 years old and still young enough to believe that love and good intentions can solve any problem. I don't understand why this is happening so fast. Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I. It's not a nursing home, Emma, I tell her gently, though the distinction feels meaningless when the result is the same. Exile from everything familiar, everything sacred, everything that makes life worth living. It's assisted living. Your father thinks it's what's best for me. But Grandma, you seem fine to me. When I visited last month, you helped me with my literature paper. You remembered every detail about Macbeth that my professor couldn't even explain properly. How can someone with memory problems do that? Her words pierce through the fog of doubt that's been clouding my thoughts since Dr. Porter's visit. Emma is right. Just 4 weeks ago, I spent 3 hours helping her analyze the symbolism in Shakespeare's darkest tragedy, drawing connections between the text and historical context that impressed even her college-level English professor. We discussed Lady Macbeth's psychological deterioration with the same intellectual rigor I brought to 38 years of teaching. But somehow, in the span of 3 weeks, I've been transformed from a competent grandmother capable of college-level literary analysis into a confused elderly woman who requires professional supervision to navigate daily life safely. Your father is just concerned about my welfare, I tell Emma, though the words taste like ashes in my mouth. He wants to make sure I'm safe. It doesn't feel right, Grandma. Something about this whole thing feels wrong. That evening, my grandson Jake calls. At 16, he lacks Emma's diplomatic approach to family conflict, and his anger blazes through the phone connection with the righteous fury of someone too young to understand that good people sometimes do terrible things for complicated reasons. This is total bullshit, Grandma, he says, apparently forgetting that I'm a 78-year-old Catholic woman who raised his father to respect his elders and watch his language. Dad's been talking about selling your house for months. He thinks you don't know, but I heard him and Mom arguing about it last Christmas. Months. They've been planning this for months, perhaps even before Dr. Porter's evaluation, perhaps even before that afternoon when they sat in my living room expressing their concerns about my safety and independence. The medical assessment wasn't designed to evaluate my competence. It was designed to provide professional legitimacy for a decision they'd already made. What exactly did you hear, Jake? I ask, though part of me doesn't want to know the answer. Dad said the house is worth like $500,000 now because of the neighborhood improvements. He said you're sitting on a gold mine and don't even realize it. Mom said they could pay off their mortgage and have enough left over to buy a vacation house in the Hamptons. A vacation house in the Hamptons. While I'm warehoused in an institutional facility, eating meals prepared by strangers and participating in craft activities designed for people with diminished intellectual capacity, my son and daughter-in-law will be enjoying weekend getaways, purchased with the proceeds from selling my life's work. The betrayal cuts deeper than anything I've experienced since Dominic's death. At least when my husband died, I understood that his departure wasn't voluntary, wasn't motivated by selfishness or greed. Death had taken him, but he'd loved me until his final breath. My son is choosing to destroy my life while claiming to act out of love and concern for my welfare. Jake, I need you to promise me something, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. Don't confront your father about this conversation. Don't let him know what you've told me. Can you do that? I guess so, Grandma, but this isn't fair. You shouldn't have to leave your house. After we hang up, I sit in Dominic's chair staring at the wall where our wedding photograph hangs. Two young people radiant with hope and certainty that their love could withstand anything life might throw at them. We look so innocent in that picture, so completely unprepared for the ways that promises could be broken, trust could be betrayed, and love could be weaponized by people who shared our blood. The next morning brings an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen from next door appears at my kitchen door carrying a plate of homemade dumplings and wearing the expression of someone who's rehearsed a difficult conversation multiple times before finding the courage to begin it. Margaret, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I saw that fancy doctor car in your driveway yesterday, she says, settling into the kitchen chair across from me with the comfortable familiarity of someone who's shared countless cups of coffee and decades of neighborhood gossip. Is everything all right with your health? Mrs. Chen is 74, a retired seamstress who immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago with her late husband. She understands what it means to build a life in a foreign place, to create home from nothing but determination and faith in the possibility that hard work might eventually lead to security and belonging. My son thinks I need to be evaluated for memory problems, I tell her, surprised by how easily the truth emerges in her presence. He's arranged for me to move to assisted living. Mrs. Chen's face hardens with the expression of someone who's witnessed enough injustice to recognize it immediately. Memory problems? Margaret, you help me with my English letters to the insurance company. You remember my granddaughter's birthday every year. You know more about this neighborhood's history than people who've lived here their whole lives. Her words are like water on parched earth, nourishing parts of my soul that have been withering under the constant assault of doubt and diminished expectations. Someone sees me clearly, recognizes my competence, validates my right to trust my own perceptions of my mental abilities. My son says I repeat myself, I confess, voicing the fear that's been eating away at my confidence like acid dissolving metal. He says I ask the same questions multiple times. Mrs. Chen snorts with the derision of someone who's raised 5 children and buried a husband. All children think their parents repeat themselves. It's because they don't listen the first time. My daughter tells me the same thing, but somehow I never repeat myself when I'm talking to people who actually pay attention to what I'm saying. That afternoon, I walked to St. Anthony's for the first time in weeks, needing the comfort of sacred space and familiar rituals. The church is nearly empty except for an elderly man praying the rosary in the front pew and a young mother with a sleeping baby who's lit a candle at the shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe. I slide into my usual pew and kneel before the crucifix that's watched over this congregation for more than 60 years. The carved figure of Christ seems different today, more human somehow, less distant than the theological abstraction I've been praying to since childhood. For the first time, I really see the suffering in his face, the abandonment in his posture, the complete isolation of someone betrayed by people he loved and trusted. Jesus, I whisper, my voice barely audible in the vast silence of the church. They're taking everything from me, my home, my dignity, my right to live as I choose. Even my own mind feels like it's not my own anymore. The silence that follows isn't empty like the terrible quiet that's been haunting my house. This silence feels expectant, pregnant with possibility. as if someone is listening with the complete attention I've been craving from my family. Would Jesus forgive this too? I ask aloud, the question emerging from depths of pain I didn't know existed. Should I forgive again? Should I just accept what they're doing to me because resistance isn't Christian? But as I stare at the figure on the cross, I remember that Jesus didn't submit passively to injustice. He overturned tables in the temple when money changers defiled sacred space. He spoke truth to power even when it cost him everything. He died not because he was weak, but because he refused to compromise his principles or betray his mission. A hand touches my shoulder gently, and I turn to see Father Morrison standing beside my pew. He's in his 70s himself, a priest who's served this parish for more than 30 years, and has heard every variation of human suffering that can fit into a confessional booth. Margaret, I've been worried about you, he says, settling into the pew beside me with the careful movements of someone whose joints protest against sudden changes in position. You've missed the last few Sunday masses. That's not like you. The concern in his voice breaks something loose inside me, and suddenly I'm telling him everything: the forced evaluation, the assisted living facility, my son's betrayal, my growing doubts about my own competence and sanity. Father Morrison listens without interruption, his weathered face growing more troubled with each detail I share. Margaret, he says when I finish, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you care for your husband through his final illness with more grace and strength than most people half your age could manage. I've seen you handle complex parish finances, coordinate charity drives, teach Sunday school with intellectual rigor that challenges adults as well as children. He pauses, choosing his words with the careful precision of someone who understands the power of language to heal or wound. The woman I know is sharp, capable, and completely competent to make her own decisions about where and how she wants to live. If your family can't see that, the problem isn't with your mind, it's with their eyes. His words settle into my heart like seeds finding fertile soil, beginning to grow into something that might eventually become hope. For the first time in weeks, I feel seen, understood, valued for who I actually am, rather than dismissed as a problem requiring management by people who claim to know better. But what can I do, Father? They have a doctor's report. They're my family. Who's going to believe an old woman over a successful professional and his specialist? Father Morrison smiles, and something in his expression suggests he knows more about fighting injustice than his gentle demeanor usually reveals. Margaret, you're not as alone as you think you are. And sometimes God works through the most unexpected people to protect those who need protection. As I walk home through the familiar streets where I've lived for more than 4 decades, I feel something shifting inside me. Not healing exactly, but perhaps the beginning of healing. The doubt is still there. The pain is still real. The betrayal still cuts like broken glass. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I don't feel completely powerless. Maybe resistance isn't unchristian after all. Maybe fighting for truth and justice is exactly what God expects from those who claim to follow his Son. Maybe it's time to stop being the victim of other people's greed and start being the woman Dominic married, the one who never backed down from a fight when something important was at stake. Father Morrison's words echo in my mind for 3 days, gaining strength like a prayer repeated until it becomes part of your heartbeat. Sometimes God works through the most unexpected people to protect those who need protection. I find myself wondering who these unexpected people might be, scanning faces at the grocery store and post office as if divine intervention might arrive wearing a familiar disguise. The answer comes on a Wednesday morning in the form of Thomas Delaney, standing on my front porch with a bouquet of yellow roses and the same gentle smile that made my heart flutter 45 years ago when we were both young teachers at different schools in Newark. Before Dominic, before marriage and children and the safe, predictable life I chose over the passionate uncertainty Thomas represented. "Hello, Margaret," he says, his voice carrying the careful warmth of someone who's rehearsed this moment many times, but still feels nervous about the reception he might receive. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I heard through the parish grapevine that you might be going through a difficult time." Thomas retired 5 years ago from his position as a detective with the Essex County Sheriff's Office, 37 years of investigating crimes against the elderly and vulnerable populations. His wife, Patricia, died of cancer 3 years ago, leaving him alone in a house that probably feels too big and too quiet, just like mine. We've exchanged polite greetings at Sunday Mass for years, two widowed people navigating the complicated social dynamics of a church community where most relationships are built around couples and families. But seeing him on my doorstep now, I remember the man who once wrote poetry on napkins during our coffee dates, who could discuss Dostoevsky and Dickinson with equal passion, who made me laugh until my sides ached with stories about his students' creative interpretations of American history. He was brilliant and funny and completely devoted to justice, the kind of man who became a police officer because he genuinely believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. "Thomas, what a lovely surprise," I say, stepping aside to let him enter. "Please come in. I'll put these beautiful flowers in water." He follows me to the kitchen, his eyes taking in details with the trained observation skills of someone who spent decades gathering evidence and reading crime scenes. I wonder what he sees. An elderly woman living alone in a house that's too big for her needs, or a competent adult maintaining her home, with the same careful attention she's always brought to everything important in her life. "Margaret, I want you to know that what I'm about to say comes from genuine concern, not idle curiosity," he begins, settling into the kitchen chair that's become designated for visitors since Dominic's death. "Father Morrison mentioned that your family is pressuring you to move to assisted living based on some kind of medical evaluation. He's worried about you. The relief of being able to speak honestly to someone who might actually understand is so overwhelming that I find myself telling Thomas everything. The forced evaluation, Dr. Porter's predetermined conclusions, Michael and Vanessa's financial motivations, my growing doubts about my own mental competence. He listens with the complete attention of someone trained to gather facts and identify patterns, asking occasional questions that help clarify timeline and sequence of events. "Margaret, I want you to understand something," Thomas says when I finish my account. "What you're describing sounds exactly like elder financial abuse. I investigated dozens of cases like this during my career. Adult children who manipulate medical evaluations to gain control over elderly parents' assets. It's more common than most people realize, and it's completely illegal. Elder financial abuse. The clinical term transforms my personal nightmare into a recognizable crime with established patterns and legal remedies. For weeks, I've been drowning in shame and self-doubt, wondering if my resistance to my family's plans was selfish or irrational. But Thomas is telling me that my instincts were correct. I'm not losing my mind. I'm being victimized by people who are exploiting my trust and love for their own financial gain. "But they have a doctor's report," I protest. "Dr. Porter is a licensed physician. Surely his evaluation carries more weight than my word against theirs." Thomas's expression hardens with the particular anger of someone who's seen too many innocent people destroyed by corrupt professionals. "Margaret, let me tell you about Dr. Wesley Porter. His name has come across my desk more times than I care to count. He's part of a network of healthcare providers who specialize in providing medical justification for family members who want to gain control over elderly relatives' assets." He pulls out his phone and shows me a news article from 6 months ago about a federal investigation into elder abuse schemes involving corrupt geriatricians. Dr. Porter's photograph stares back at me from the screen, along with details about his involvement in multiple cases where elderly people were declared incompetent based on questionable evaluations. "The FBI has been investigating him for 2 years, Thomas explains. He's still practicing because these cases take time to develop, but his license is under review by the state medical board. Every evaluation he's conducted in the past 3 years is being scrutinized for evidence of fraud and malpractice. The knowledge hits me like lightning illuminating a dark landscape, revealing the true shape of dangers I'd been stumbling through blindly. I'm not suffering from cognitive decline. I'm the victim of an elaborate criminal scheme designed to steal my home and destroy my independence. My son isn't protecting me from the dangers of aging. He's collaborating with criminals to rob his own mother. What can I do? I ask, though for the first time in weeks, the question carries hope rather than despair. Thomas reaches across the table and takes my hand with the gentle firmness of someone offering both comfort and strength. "First, we're going to document everything. Every conversation, every document, every attempt to pressure or manipulate you. Then we're going to contact the FBI agents who are investigating Dr. Porter's operation. That afternoon, I do something I haven't done since Dominic's death. I take control of my own life with decisive action. Following Thomas's guidance, I drive to my bank and request copies of all my financial records for the past year. I visit my lawyer's office and update my will to ensure Michael cannot inherit my house if something happens to me before this situation is resolved. I schedule an appointment with my longtime physician, Dr. Patterson, for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation to counter Dr. Porter's fraudulent assessment. Each action feels like prayer in motion, a practical expression of faith that God helps those who help themselves. For the first time in months, I'm not passively accepting other people's definitions of my capabilities and limitations. I'm actively asserting my right to live as I choose, in the home I love, surrounded by memories that give my life meaning and purpose. That evening, I kneel before the crucifix in my bedroom and offer a prayer of gratitude that feels different from any prayer I've spoken since childhood. Thank you, Jesus, for sending Thomas to help me see the truth. Thank you for giving me the strength to fight back against those who would steal what Dominic and I built together. Help me to be brave enough to see this through to the end. The next morning brings a phone call from Michael, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Mom, I just heard from Dr. Patterson's office that you've scheduled another cognitive evaluation. Why would you do that without discussing it with me first? The question reveals how completely he's assumed ownership of my medical decisions, how thoroughly he's convinced himself that my competence is his responsibility to determine and manage. But Thomas's revelations have stripped away the doubt that made me vulnerable to such manipulation, and I answer with clarity I haven't felt in weeks, because I have the right to seek a second opinion from a doctor I trust, Michael. Dr. Porter's evaluation was conducted at your request, not mine. Dr. Patterson has been my physician for 15 years, and he knows my medical history better than any stranger you might hire to support your predetermined conclusions. The silence that follows my response crackles with tension and surprise. Michael isn't accustomed to being challenged by his mother, hasn't prepared for the possibility that I might resist his authority or question his motives. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this situation. Dr. Porter is a specialist with credentials and experience that Dr. Patterson doesn't have. You can't just shop around for doctors until you find one who tells you what you want to hear. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in weeks, I reply, drawing strength from Thomas's friendship and Father Morrison's validation. And what I want to hear is the truth about my mental competence from someone who isn't being paid to reach predetermined conclusions. What exactly are you implying? Michael's voice carries a dangerous edge that I recognize from his childhood tantrums when he didn't get his way. I'm not implying anything, Michael. I'm stating directly that Dr. Porter's evaluation was fraudulent, that you collaborated with a corrupt physician to manufacture evidence of cognitive decline that doesn't exist, and that your concern for my welfare is actually greed disguised as filial duty. The accusations hang between us like a bridge burning, destroying the pretense of loving concern that's masked his true motivations throughout this ordeal. For the first time since this nightmare began, I've spoken the complete truth about what's happening to me, refused to participate in the elaborate fiction that Michael and Vanessa have constructed to justify their theft. Those are serious accusations, Mom. I hope you understand the implications of what you're saying. I understand exactly what I'm saying, Michael, and I understand exactly what you're doing. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences when the FBI finishes investigating Dr. Porter and everyone who's collaborated with his schemes. The line goes dead, leaving me alone with the sudden realization that I've just declared war on my own son. The knowledge should terrify me, should fill me with the kind of familial guilt that's been controlling my behavior for months. Instead, I feel something I haven't experienced since Dominic's death, the fierce satisfaction of standing up for myself, of refusing to be victimized by people who mistake my love for weakness. That night, I sleep better than I have in months, secure in the knowledge that I'm no longer fighting this battle alone. Thomas calls in the evening to report that he's contacted his former colleagues at the FBI, and they're very interested in adding my case to their investigation of Dr. Porter's operation. Margaret, he says, his voice warm with affection and respect. "I want you to know how proud I am of you. It takes tremendous courage to stand up to family members who are trying to manipulate and control you, but you're doing the right thing, and you're going to win this fight." As I kneel for my evening prayers, I offer thanks for strength I didn't know I possessed, for friends who appeared when I needed them most, for the grace to see truth through the fog of lies and manipulation that nearly destroyed my faith in my own perceptions. "Lord," I whisper into the familiar darkness of my bedroom, "I place this situation in your hands. Help me to be strong enough to see justice done, wise enough to know when to fight and when to forgive, and faithful enough to trust that you are working through all of this for purposes I may not yet understand." For the first time in months, the silence that follows feels full of divine presence and infinite possibility. Dr. Patterson's evaluation takes place on a Tuesday morning in his familiar office, where I've been receiving medical care for 15 years. Unlike Dr. Porter's clinical interrogation in my home, this feels like a conversation between old friends who respect each other's intelligence and experience. Dr. Patterson has watched me navigate Dominic's final illness with competence and grace, has seen me manage complex medication schedules, and make difficult healthcare decisions with clarity and wisdom. "Margaret, I have to tell you, I'm quite disturbed by Dr. Porter's assessment," he says after completing a comprehensive cognitive examination that lasted 2 hours. "His conclusions are completely inconsistent with everything I know about your mental acuity and functional capacity. In my professional opinion, you show no signs whatsoever of cognitive impairment or dementia." His words wash over me like absolution, confirming what my heart has known all along. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. My judgment as sound as when I taught literature to hundreds of students and managed our household finances for 4 decades. The doubt that Michael and Dr. Porter planted has been extracted like a poisonous splinter, leaving behind clean truth that no one can distort or manipulate. "Doctor, would you be willing to put that assessment in writing? And would you be willing to testify to that effect if legal proceedings become necessary?" Dr. Patterson's expression grows serious as he recognizes the implications of my questions. "Margaret, are you telling me that someone is using Dr. Porter's fraudulent evaluation to try to gain control over your affairs?" When I explain the situation in detail, his face hardens with the particular anger that medical professionals reserve for colleagues who betray their oath to first do no harm. "Not only will I provide written documentation of your cognitive competence, but I'm going to report Dr. Porter to the State Medical Board for conducting an evaluation that appears designed to reach predetermined conclusions rather than assess actual mental status." 3 days later, the confrontation I've been both dreading and anticipating arrives in the form of an emergency family meeting that Michael schedules for Saturday afternoon. He calls Friday evening with the imperious tone of someone who's accustomed to having his authority acknowledged without question. "Mom, we need to meet tomorrow to discuss your living situation. Vanessa and I have made arrangements with Sunset Manor, and they need an answer by Monday about the move-in date. We can't keep postponing this decision indefinitely." "Then perhaps you should have consulted me before making arrangements on my behalf," I reply with a calmness that surprises even me. "I never agreed to move to assisted living, Michael. That was your decision, not mine. Mom, Dr. Porter's evaluation clearly indicates that you're not capable of making these kinds of complex decisions anymore. We're trying to protect you from yourself. Protect me from myself." The phrase encapsulates everything that's wrong with his approach to this situation. The assumption that my resistance to his plans proves my incompetence rather than my legitimate preference to remain in my own home. He's transformed my autonomy into a symptom of mental illness that requires his intervention and management. "I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I tell him. "But Michael, you should know that I've obtained a second medical opinion that completely contradicts Dr. Porter's assessment. And I've learned some very interesting information about Dr. Porter's professional practices." The silence that follows my statement stretches for nearly 30 seconds, filled with the kind of tension that occurs when carefully constructed lies begin to crumble under the weight of unexpected truth. Saturday afternoon arrives with the crisp clarity of autumn in New Jersey, golden sunlight streaming through windows that have witnessed 41 years of family gatherings, birthday celebrations, and quiet moments of domestic contentment. I prepare for this confrontation like a warrior preparing for battle, armoring myself with prayer and surrounding myself with documents that prove my competence and expose their deception. Thomas arrives an hour before Michael and Vanessa, carrying a briefcase filled with evidence that will transform this family meeting into something my son never intended, a reckoning with the truth about his motivations and methods. His presence beside me feels like divine providence, the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. "Margaret, are you ready for this?" he asks, settling into Dominic's old chair with the easy confidence of someone who's faced down criminals far more dangerous than my greedy son and his ambitious wife. "I've been ready for weeks," I reply, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I'm tired of being treated like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. When Michael and Vanessa arrive, they enter my house with the entitled confidence of people who've already mentally divided my possessions and calculated the profit from selling my home. Vanessa carries herself like someone attending a business meeting where the outcome has already been determined, while Michael adopts the patronizing demeanor he probably uses with subordinates at his pharmaceutical company. Their expressions change immediately when they see Thomas sitting in my living room, his briefcase open on the coffee table and official-looking documents spread across its surface like evidence in a courtroom. "Mom, who is this?" Michael asks, his voice tight with suspicion and barely controlled anger. "This is Thomas Delaney, an old friend and retired detective who's been helping me understand some troubling aspects of Dr. Porter's evaluation," I reply, drawing strength from the simple act of introducing someone who's on my side rather than theirs. Vanessa's face goes pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Detective, why would you involve law enforcement in a private family matter?" "Because this stopped being a private family matter when you collaborated with a corrupt physician to manufacture evidence of mental incompetence in order to steal my house," I say, my voice carrying the authority of someone who's finally stopped pretending that love and criminal conspiracy can coexist peacefully. Thomas opens his briefcase and removes a file thick with documents that represent weeks of investigation into Dr. Porter's practices and my family's financial motivations. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, I think you should know that Dr. Wesley Porter is currently under federal investigation for elder abuse schemes involving fraudulent cognitive evaluations. Every assessment he's conducted in the past 3 years is being reviewed for evidence of criminal conspiracy." The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the sound of Vanessa's sharp intake of breath and the subtle shift of Michael's weight as he processes the implications of Thomas's revelation. For the first time since this ordeal began, I watch my son and daughter-in-law experience the fear and helplessness they've been inflicting on me for months. Furthermore, Thomas continues, consulting his notes with the methodical precision of someone presenting evidence to a jury, "I've documented several conversations between your son and Dr. Porter that occurred before the evaluation, conversations in which specific conclusions were discussed and arranged in advance." Michael's face flushes with the desperate anger of someone whose carefully constructed lies are collapsing in real time. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove any criminal conspiracy. We were acting out of legitimate concern for my mother's welfare." "Actually, Mr. Morrison, I can prove exactly that," Thomas replies, producing a recording device that he places on my coffee table like a smoking gun. "You're welcome to listen to the phone conversation between you and Dr. Porter from 3 weeks ago, in which you specifically requested an evaluation that would support assisted living placement regardless of your mother's actual cognitive status." The recording begins to play, Michael's voice emerging from the speaker with devastating clarity. "Dr. Porter, I need documentation that my mother isn't competent to live independently. She's sitting on a valuable property that she refuses to sell, and my wife and I need access to those assets for our own financial planning. Can you provide an evaluation that supports assisted living placement?" Dr. Porter's response is equally damning. "Mr. Morrison, I've handled dozens of cases like this. For my standard fee of $5,000, I can provide documentation of cognitive impairment that will satisfy any court or financial institution. The key is to focus on behaviors that can be interpreted as confusion or memory problems, regardless of their actual significance." As the recording continues, documenting their conspiracy to defraud me of my home and independence, I watch my son's face cycle through denial, anger, and finally the hollow realization that his criminal behavior has been exposed beyond any possibility of explanation or excuse. Vanessa stands abruptly, her composure finally cracking under the weight of evidence that could destroy their comfortable suburban lifestyle. Michael, we need to leave. We need to call a lawyer. Yes, you do need to call a lawyer. I agree, rising from my chair with dignity I haven't felt since this nightmare began, because I'm filing criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy, and I'm ensuring that you never inherit so much as a photograph from this house. Michael drops to his knees beside my chair, his adult authority dissolving into the desperate pleading of a child who's been caught in an unforgivable lie. Mom, please, I made a mistake. I was greedy. I was wrong. But I'm still your son. Don't destroy my life over this. Looking down at him, I feel something I never expected to experience toward my own child. Complete emotional detachment from his suffering. For months, he's manipulated my maternal love to facilitate his theft, used my trust as a weapon against my independence, exploited my natural desire to believe the best about family to nearly destroy my life. Michael, I say, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who's found peace in the midst of betrayal. I forgive you, because that's what Jesus requires of those who follow him. But forgiveness doesn't mean enabling your criminal behavior, or pretending that your actions haven't revealed exactly who you've chosen to become. I walk to the mantel where my Bible sits beside Dominic's photograph, opening to a passage I marked years ago during a particularly difficult period in our marriage. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. I've spent months questioning my own mind, doubting my competence, wondering if love required me to surrender everything Dominic and I built together to satisfy your greed. I continue, addressing not just Michael, but the version of myself who nearly succumbed to their manipulation. But God didn't create me to be a victim of other people's selfishness. He created me to stand for truth, to protect what's sacred, to resist those who would steal in the name of love. Thomas stands beside me, his presence both protective and affirming. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, you have 24 hours to contact the FBI agents investigating Dr. Porter's operation and arrange to cooperate fully with their investigation. If you choose not to cooperate voluntarily, warrants will be issued for your arrest on federal charges. As they leave my house for what I know will be the last time, I feel something I haven't experienced since Dominic's death. Complete faith in my own judgment, absolute confidence in my right to live as I choose, and perfect peace with decisions made from strength rather than fear. That evening, kneeling before the crucifix that's witnessed 41 years of prayers in this house, I offer thanks for deliverance I couldn't have imagined when this ordeal began. Thank you, Lord, for showing me that resistance to evil isn't unchristian. It's essential. Thank you for sending Thomas to help me fight, for giving me courage I didn't know I possessed, for proving that even at 78, I'm not powerless against those who would destroy what's sacred. The silence that follows feels different from any quiet I've experienced in this house. Not the emptiness of abandonment, but the fullness of divine presence and infinite possibility. I am free. The weeks following the confrontation unfold like a slow resurrection, each day bringing new evidence that my life belongs to me again. For the first time in months, I wake each morning not with dread about what fresh manipulation awaits, but with genuine curiosity about how God might choose to bless this day. The house feels different too, no longer a fortress under siege, but a sanctuary restored to its rightful purpose as a place of peace, prayer, and abundant grace. Thomas has become a daily presence in my life, not as a romantic interest. We're both too old and too wise to complicate our friendship with expectations of passion, but as a companion who understands that loneliness doesn't have to mean isolation, that two people can share coffee and conversation and find in each other's company a reflection of divine love that sustains without demanding ownership. Margaret, I've been thinking, he says one morning as we sit in my kitchen watching cardinals fight over territory at the bird feeder Dominic installed 15 years ago. There's a retreat center in the Pocono Mountains that offers programs specifically for people our age who are navigating major life transitions. It's run by the Franciscan Sisters, Very spiritual, but not preachy. Would you consider going with me for a long weekend? The idea of leaving my house for several days would have terrified me just months ago, when the possibility of forced relocation hung over every moment like a sword of Damocles. But now the prospect of voluntary travel, chosen freely and undertaken with a trusted friend, feels like the ultimate expression of the freedom I've reclaimed through faith and courage. Thomas, I think that sounds wonderful, I reply, surprised by how easily the words emerge. When was the last time I did something just because it might bring me joy, not because duty or obligation demanded it? We spend the afternoon planning the trip, consulting brochures and making reservations with the excitement of teenagers arranging their first adventure away from parental supervision. The retreat center offers guided meditation, nature walks, spiritual direction, and something called contemplative gardening that involves working with soil and plants as a form of prayer in motion. You know what appeals to me most? I tell Thomas as we review the schedule of activities. The silence. 3 days where no one expects me to perform any particular version of myself, where I can simply be present to whatever God wants to reveal without having to defend my right to occupy space in the world. That evening, I receive an unexpected phone call from Emma, my granddaughter's voice bright with excitement and relief. Grandma, I just heard from Dad about what happened with that doctor. I'm so glad you stood up for yourself. I was really worried about you having to leave your house. How are things with your father? I ask, genuinely curious about how Michael is handling the consequences of his failed conspiracy. He's pretty shaken up, honestly. He and Mom had to hire criminal defense lawyers, and they're going to have to testify in federal court about Dr. Porter's operation. But Grandma, I think he's finally starting to understand how wrong he was. He asked me to tell you that he's sorry, that he knows sorry isn't enough, but he wanted you to know. I consider Emma's words carefully, testing my heart for any residual anger or desire for revenge against my son. What I find instead is something close to compassion, not the enablement that would excuse his behavior, but the kind of loving detachment that wishes him well while maintaining firm boundaries about what I will and will not tolerate in the future. Emma, you can tell your father that I forgive him, as Jesus commands us to forgive those who trespass against us. But you can also tell him that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean returning to the way things were before. If he wants a relationship with me going forward, it will have to be built on respect for my autonomy and honest acknowledgement of the harm he caused. 3 weeks later, Thomas and I drive through the mountains of Pennsylvania toward St. Clair's Retreat Center, my first vacation in more than 5 years. The autumn foliage creates a cathedral of gold and crimson around winding roads that climb higher into landscape that feels touched by divine artistry, each curve revealing new vistas that take my breath away with their unexpected beauty. The retreat center sits on 200 acres of forest and meadow, with walking trails that wind through groves of ancient oak and maple trees. The buildings are simple but elegant, constructed from local stone and timber in a style that honors both function and beauty without ostentation or waste. My room is small but perfectly appointed, with a single window that frames a view of mountains rolling toward the horizon like waves in an ocean of green and gold. For 3 days, I participate in activities I've never experienced before. Silent meditation in a chapel where the only sounds are breathing and the subtle movements of other souls seeking connection with the divine. Walking meditation along forest paths where each step becomes a prayer and each breath an act of gratitude. Spiritual direction with Sister Catherine, a Franciscan nun in her 70s who listens to my story with the complete attention of someone who's devoted her life to recognizing God's presence in human suffering and triumph. Margaret, Sister Catherine says during our final conversation, you've experienced what St. Francis would call perfect joy. Not the absence of suffering, but the presence of God's grace sufficient to transform suffering into wisdom, betrayal into strength, isolation into communion with the divine. On the final evening of the retreat, I sit alone in the chapel during Vespers, surrounded by other pilgrims whose faces reflect the same peace I feel settling into my bones like warmth from a fireplace on a cold winter night. The chanted prayers wash over me in Latin and English, words that have sustained faithful people through centuries of trials and triumphs, connecting me to a community of believers that extends far beyond the boundaries of my small life and individual struggles. Thank you, Jesus, I whisper into the candlelit silence, for showing me that even at 78, I can be reborn. Thank you for proving that no one has the authority to diminish what you have declared sacred. Thank you for this new chapter that I never could have imagined when I thought my story was ending. When we return to New Jersey, I discover that my relationship with my parish community has been transformed by my willingness to share my story with others. Word has spread through St. Anthony's about my confrontation with elder abuse, and several parishioners have approached me with their own stories of family members who've tried to manipulate medical evaluations or legal proceedings to gain control over elderly relatives' assets. Margaret, would you consider leading a support group for people facing similar challenges? Father Morrison asks after Sunday Mass. I've had 3 different families contact me in the past month, asking for guidance about protecting elderly members from exploitation by their own children. You've walked through this fire and emerged stronger. Your experience could help others find the courage to resist. The idea of turning my suffering into ministry, of using my hard-won wisdom to protect other vulnerable people, feels like the perfect completion of a circle that began with betrayal and ends with service. Within a month, I'm facilitating weekly meetings in the church's community room, sharing resources about elder rights, connecting people with legal assistance, and most importantly, providing the kind of validation I desperately needed during my darkest hours. The most important thing to remember, I tell the group during one of our sessions, is that love never requires you to surrender your dignity, your autonomy, or your right to live according to your own values. When family members use concern for your welfare as a weapon to control your choices, that's not love. That's manipulation disguised as devotion. My house has become a gathering place for friendships I never had time to cultivate when my energy was consumed by trying to satisfy my son's impossible expectations. Mrs. Chen and I host weekly dinners for other widows in the neighborhood, transforming my dining room into a place where stories are shared, laughter echoes, and the wisdom of survived heartbreak is passed between women who understand that growing older doesn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. Thomas and I have developed a comfortable routine of shared activities that honor both our independence and our companionship. We attend concerts at the community college, volunteer together at the parish food pantry, take day trips to museums and historical sites we never had time to visit when we were consumed with the obligations of younger life. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and shared values rather than need or desperation, creating space for genuine affection to grow without the complications that destroyed so many relationships in our pasts. Margaret, he says one evening as we sit on the back deck Dominic built, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I want you to know that watching you reclaim your life has been one of the most inspiring experiences of my retirement. You've shown me what it means to age with grace and courage. 6 months after the confrontation that saved my home and my sanity, I receive a letter from Michael. Not a phone call or unexpected visit, but a carefully written communication that acknowledges the gravity of his actions and expresses genuine remorse for the pain he caused. He's pleading guilty to federal conspiracy charges in exchange for cooperation with the investigation that's resulted in Dr. Porter's arrest and the prosecution of dozens of families who participated in similar schemes. Mom, he writes, I know that sorry isn't sufficient to repair the damage I've done to our relationship, but I need you to know that every day I wake up ashamed of the person I became when greed mattered more to me than your happiness and dignity. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve a second chance. But I hope someday you'll believe that losing your respect has taught me more about my failures than any punishment the court could impose. Reading his letter, I feel something I never expected to experience toward my son again. Hope that redemption might be possible even for someone who betrayed the most sacred bonds of family trust. Not hope for reconciliation on his terms, not willingness to pretend his actions were less harmful than they were, but hope that genuine repentance might eventually create space for a relationship built on truth rather than manipulation. That night, I pray for Michael with more sincerity than I've felt toward him since this ordeal began. Lord, If it's your will, help him learn from his mistakes. Help him become the man I tried to raise him to be. But whether he changes or not, thank you for showing me that my worth doesn't depend on his approval. My happiness doesn't require his presence, and my future is limited only by my faith in your infinite possibilities. As I prepare for bed in the house that truly belongs to me again, I pause before the mirror in my bedroom and see something I haven't seen in years. A woman who knows her own mind, trusts her own judgment, and faces tomorrow with anticipation rather than anxiety. I am 78 years old, I say to my reflection, and I am just beginning to understand who God created me to be when fear no longer controls my choices. For the first time since Dominic's death, I fall asleep smiling. 1 year later, I stand in the garden behind my house on a crisp October morning, watching Thomas plant tulip bulbs that will bloom next spring, in colors we'll never see today, but trust will bring beauty when winter finally surrenders to resurrection. The irony isn't lost on me. At 79, I'm planting flowers for a future I might not live to see, but doing so with more hope and purpose than I've felt in decades. The past 12 months have unfolded like a slow miracle, each day bringing evidence that God's plans for my life extend far beyond the narrow boundaries I'd accepted during those dark months when my son's betrayal nearly convinced me that my usefulness to the world had ended. Instead of shrinking into irrelevance, I've discovered that everything I experienced, the pain, the isolation, the systematic attempt to destroy my dignity, was preparation for a ministry I never could have imagined when I thought my story was concluding. Margaret, look at this, Thomas says, holding up a newspaper clipping that arrived in this morning's mail from Emma. Your granddaughter sent an article about the federal prosecution of Dr. Porter's elder abuse network. They're calling it the largest case of its kind in New Jersey history. The headline reads, Corrupt Doctor Sentenced to 15 Years for Elder Fraud Conspiracy, with a subheading that mentions, Dozens of families prosecuted for participating in schemes to defraud elderly relatives of homes and assets. Michael's name appears in the fourth paragraph, identified as a cooperating witness whose testimony helped expose the full scope of the operation. 18 families, I read aloud, scanning the article for details about other victims who suffered similar betrayals. 18 elderly people who were declared mentally incompetent by Dr. Porter, so their own children could steal their homes, their savings, their independence. How many of them fought back, Thomas? How many just accepted what was happening to them, because they couldn't imagine that their own families would betray them so completely? The question haunts me because I know the answer. Most of them probably surrendered without resistance, convinced by the same combination of medical authority and family manipulation that nearly destroyed my life. They trusted the wrong people, accepted diagnoses that confirmed their worst fears about aging, and allowed themselves to be warehoused in institutions while their life's work was sold to finance other people's dreams. That's why what you're doing matters so much, Thomas reminds me, gesturing toward the stack of letters on my kitchen table from people who've contacted me through the elder advocacy group I've been working with since spring. You're giving people permission to fight back, showing them that resistance isn't selfish or ungrateful. It's necessary for survival. The advocacy group began as Father Morrison's suggestion that I share my experience with other parishioners, but it's grown into something far more significant. A network of supporters that spans 3 counties and includes social workers, attorneys, medical professionals, and dozens of elderly people who've learned to recognize the warning signs of family-based financial abuse. We meet twice monthly at St. Anthony's, but our real work happens in living rooms and kitchen tables where frightened people gather courage to challenge adult children who've confused love with control. Last month, I received a phone call that perfectly illustrated why this work feels like divine calling rather than personal choice. A woman named Dorothy Patterson called from Princeton, her voice shaking with the same terror I remembered from my darkest days, explaining that her daughter had arranged for a cognitive evaluation that would determine whether Dorothy could continue living independently in her condominium. Mrs. Russo, I found your name through the Catholic diocese, Dorothy whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow alert her daughter to this act of rebellion. I'm 81 years old, and I've been managing my own affairs perfectly well since my husband died 3 years ago. But my daughter says I'm forgetting things, repeating myself, making poor decisions about money. She's scheduled an appointment with some doctor I've never heard of, and she says the results will determine whether I need to move to assisted living. The details were so similar to my own experience that I felt physically sick while listening to Dorothy's story. Her daughter Susan worked in real estate, had been pressuring Dorothy to sell her condominium in an expensive neighborhood where property values had tripled in recent years, and had begun questioning Dorothy's mental competence whenever she refused to consider moving to a more appropriate living situation for someone her age. "Dorothy," I told her with the authority of someone who's walked through this particular fire and emerged stronger, "you're not losing your mind. You're being manipulated by someone who wants access to your assets. And you have more power than you realize to stop this from happening." Within a week, I'd connected Dorothy with an attorney who specializes in elder rights, arranged for her to receive a legitimate cognitive evaluation from a physician with no financial incentive to reach predetermined conclusions, and helped her document every conversation in which her daughter had pressured her to sell her home or questioned her mental competence. The outcome was exactly what I'd hoped. Dorothy's evaluation confirmed her complete cognitive competence. Her attorney sent her daughter a cease and desist letter threatening prosecution for attempted elder abuse, and Dorothy discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she joined our advocacy group and has since helped 3 other women recognize and resist similar manipulation by their own families. "Mrs. Russo, you saved my life," Dorothy told me during our last conversation. "Not just my home or my money, my life. I was starting to believe that maybe I really was losing my mind, that maybe my daughter knew better than I did what was good for me. You showed me that love never requires surrender of dignity, and that sometimes the most Christian thing you can do is fight back against people who claim to be protecting you." These victories sustain me through the more difficult aspects of advocacy work, the cases where families succeed in their manipulation, where elderly people lack the resources or support systems to resist, where fear and shame prevent victims from seeking help until it's too late to recover what's been stolen. Every month, I hear stories that break my heart and strengthen my resolve in equal measure. But the work has also brought unexpected blessings that feel like direct gifts from God's infinite mercy. Last spring, I was contacted by the producers of a local television news program who wanted to feature my story as part of an investigative series about elder abuse in New Jersey. The interview was terrifying. I'd never spoken on camera before, never imagined that my private struggles might become public testimony that could help other people recognize and resist similar manipulation. "Mrs. Russo," the reporter asked during our conversation, "what would you say to elderly people who are being pressured by family members to give up their independence? What advice would you offer to someone facing the same situation you experienced?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about Dorothy and the dozens of other people who'd contacted me seeking guidance and support, and spoke from the deepest truth I'd learned through my ordeal. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Love never requires you to surrender your dignity or your right to make decisions about your own life. And most importantly, remember that you're never too old to fight for what's rightfully yours. Not just your possessions, but your autonomy, your respect, and your right to live according to your own values. The program aired on a Sunday evening in May, and by Monday morning, my phone was ringing with calls from people across the tri-state area who'd recognized their own struggles in my story. Some were seeking advice about current situations. Others wanted to share their own experiences of family betrayal and recovery. And several were adult children who'd been horrified to realize that their own behavior toward elderly parents mirrored the manipulation I'd described. Among the most meaningful responses was a letter from Michael, the first communication I'd received from him since his sentencing to community service and supervised probation. His words were carefully chosen, clearly the product of extensive reflection and possibly therapeutic guidance. "Mom, watching your interview made me understand something I've been trying to deny for months. The person you showed on television, the strong, intelligent, competent woman who fought back against injustice, is exactly who you've always been. I didn't try to steal your house because you were mentally incompetent. I tried to steal your house because I was morally incompetent. because I'd convinced myself that my financial desires mattered more than your happiness and dignity. I'm grateful that you were strong enough to stop me, not just for your sake, but for mine. Living with the knowledge that I'd destroyed my own mother would have been worse than any punishment the court could have imposed. Reading Michael's letter, I experienced something I'd thought impossible when this ordeal began: genuine forgiveness that wasn't based on denial or enablement, but on recognition that redemption remains possible even for those who've committed terrible betrayals. I wrote back, not to reconcile in the way we'd once related, but to express hope that his understanding of love might evolve beyond possession and control, to include respect and genuine care for others' autonomy. This morning, as Thomas and I finish planting bulbs that represent faith in futures we might not live to see, I receive a phone call that feels like divine confirmation of everything I've learned about God's capacity to transform suffering into service. The caller is Sister Catherine from St. Clare's Retreat Center, the Franciscan nun who provided spiritual direction during my healing retreat last autumn. "Margaret, I have a wonderful opportunity to discuss with you," she says, her voice bright with excitement. "We're developing a new program for elderly people who've experienced family trauma or betrayal, and we'd like you to consider serving as a retreat facilitator. Your combination of lived experience and spiritual wisdom would be perfect for helping others find healing and purpose after devastating losses." The invitation feels like the completion of a circle that began with betrayal and concludes with the opportunity to transform my wounds into wisdom that might help other wounded people find their way back to wholeness. At 79, I'm being offered the chance to begin an entirely new ministry, to use everything I've learned about faith, resilience, and the power of truth to help other people discover that their stories don't end with victimization. They begin again with the choice to resist, to fight back, to trust that God's plans for their lives extend far beyond the narrow limitations that other people might try to impose. "Sister Catherine," I reply without hesitation, "I would be honored to serve in whatever way God might use my experience to bring healing to others." As I hang up the phone and return to the garden where spring bulbs rest in dark earth, waiting for resurrection that will come in God's time and God's way, I reflect on the journey that brought me from despair to purpose, from isolation to community, from victim to advocate for others facing similar struggles. The house around me no longer feels too big or too quiet. It's filled with the presence of friends who've become chosen family, with the voices of people who call seeking guidance and support, with the peace that comes from knowing that every room holds memories worth preserving, and every day offers opportunities to serve God's purposes in ways I'm still discovering. I am 79 years old, and I am not finished. I am not invisible. I am not powerless. I am exactly who God created me to be when fear no longer controls my choices, and love no longer requires me to diminish myself to satisfy other people's comfort. I am free. Have you ever experienced something like Margaret's story? Or do you know someone who has faced betrayal by family members they trusted? How did faith help you or them find the strength to fight back and reclaim dignity? If this story touched your heart, please share it in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to this channel so this message can reach someone who desperately needs to hear that they're not alone, that they're not powerless, and that it's never too late to fight for what's rightfully theirs. May God bless everyone who's been through something like this. In Jesus' name, amen.